right, guys, we're going to move on to note 7.4, looking at how the world was changed by World War I. So the world was transformed by World War I. 22 million soldiers and civilians died across all of the countries that were involved in the war. 20 million additionally were wounded, and 10 million were refugees, meaning that they had no place to live because their homes had been so damaged by the war. So again, 22 million soldiers and civilians dead. $20 million wounded. European cities, towns, and farms were completely destroyed. So this is an image of before the war in the village of Esnez. And this is what it looks like after the war. Before the war, Hotel de la Princerie in Verdun. After the war. The war cost an estimated $338 billion, and massive funds were needed to rebuild Europe. When World War I ended, U.S. President Woodrow Wilson believed that America should take a lead in shaping the peace process. America was much more in a position to take on a leadership role at this time because we had not suffered the losses that other European countries have. So when you think about the United States and its place on the world stage, I want you to think of the Spanish-American War is the United States entering the world stage. The end of World War I marks the point at which the United States becomes a leader in the world stage. So near the end of the war, Wilson developed a peace plan called the 14 Points. His peace plan was based on eliminating the reasons for World War I. So we want to get rid of the militarism, the alliances, nationalism, imperialism, and of course not have foreign leaders assassinated, but he wanted to deal with the first four, militarism, alliances, imperialism, and nationalism. And he hoped to avoid all future wars by creating an international organization to discuss and arbitrate, or basically negotiate problems that might lead to armed conflict. So what I would like you to do with your notes is pause the video here. So using the chart in your notes, I want you to write in your own words what each section of Woodrow Wilson's peace plan means, and be prepared to share your answers in class. So Wilson's 14 points contain three main themes. Points 1 through 5 focus on creating new international rules that would eliminate future wars. No more secret treaties or alliances, a reduction of militaries, freedom of the seas and free trade, and international control over colonies to end imperialism. So you see him addressing a lot of the main causes of the war. Point 6 through 13 focuses on dividing weak empires like Austria-Hungary and Ottoman Empire into new nations based on self-determination. I want you to highlight that term, self-determination, because it's a really important concept that comes out of Wilson's 14 points. So basically, Austria-Hungary and the Ottoman Empire were a collection of multi-ethnic communities, and what Woodrow Wilson wanted was for these communities to be able to govern themselves the way that they saw fit and self-determine the way the United States did. Wilson believed that new nations should have borders drawn with consideration to ethnic, national issues. He wanted new nations to be free to choose their own governments. And point 14 focused on creating a League of Nations to settle all future international problems by diplomacy rather than by war. So this is a predecessor of the United Nations. President Wilson traveled to the Paris Peace Conference in 1919 to create the Treaty of Versailles, and he hoped his 14 points would be the framework for the peace treaty, and he was a member of the Big Four. So on the far left, you see British Prime Minister David Lloyd George, Italian Prime Minister Vittorio Orlando, French Premier Georges Clemenceau, and then President Woodrow Wilson. Now, the Treaty of Versailles is specifically a treaty made with Germany. Now, it is not insignificant that the treaty is signed in Paris. The French really wanted to have the treaty and the peace treaty negotiated in France because the French did the bleeding and the French did the dying in this war, and they wanted to have a major say. But Wilson quickly learned that European leaders wanted to punish Germany and did not want to share his vision for a peace without victory. During the peace process, Wilson had to compromise some of his 14 points. And on June 28, 1919, the delegates agreed to the Treaty of Versailles, which is extraordinarily punitive and significantly punished the Germans for causing the war. So the delegates at the peace conference agreed to create a League of Nations. The League was made up of a General Assembly of 27 nations. Member nations agreed to use diplomacy and not war to settle conflicts. Member nations agreed to work together to stop future acts of aggression. The Treaty of Versailles also redrew the map of Europe and the Middle East. So if you look at the map on the left, you see the boundaries before World War II, and on the right, you see the boundaries after World War II. So you see the establishment of Finland, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Poland, Czechoslovakia, Yugoslavia, Syria, Iraq, what will become Jordan and Palestine, which is modern-day Israel. Central Europe was redrawn to reduce the power of Austria-Hungary. German territories were used to create Poland. Germany's border with France was demilitarized to prevent any future invasion. The Ottoman Empire was divided. Britain and France gained mandates in the Middle East, meaning that Britain and France are treating the Middle East almost kind of like colonies. New nations were created from territory taken away. Russia, who left World War I early after the Russian Revolution. The Treaty of Versailles severely punished Germany for its role in World War I. Germany was forced to surrender all of its overseas colonies. So colonies, for example, in Africa that had been German were redistributed to Allied countries. Germany's military was reduced and forbidden from building weapons. And Germany had to accept full responsibility for the war and pay $33 billion in war reparations. Germany was destitute already as a result of its expenditures for the war, and so $33 billion in reparations was an extraordinarily punitive amount of money. In fact, I think it was like 2010 or 2011 in which Germany finally made its last payment on these. The Treaty of Versailles did not address important issues that caused World War I. The treaty did not require any of the Allied nations to demilitarize or give up their imperial colonies. The treaty did not address secret alliances or guarantee free trade, and the treaty was so severe that it kept Germany from rebuilding. And so because Germany was unable to rebuild, a great resentment within Germany is going to grow towards the Allied nations. Even though the major Allied and Central Powers signed the Treaty of Versailles, the U.S. President Wilson could not sign the treaty because the Constitution gives the Senate the power to approve treaties, and a 2/3 vote in the Senate was needed to ratify the treaty and join the League of Nations. Many senators did not like the treaty because signing it meant joining the League of Nations. And senators known as strong reservationists demanded changes to the League covenant that required members to work together to stop aggression. So Article 10 of the League Covenant, the members of the League undertake to respect and preserve against aggression the territorial integrity and existing political independence of all members of the League. In case of any such aggression or in case of any threat or danger of such aggression, the Council shall advise upon the means by which this obligation shall be fulfilled. So essentially, if one of the League of Nations member nations is attacked, then everyone has to respond, and that made some senators, the strong reservationists, uncomfortable. Senators known as the Irreconcilables wanted the U.S. to return to a state of isolationism and refused to sign the treaty or commit to the League of Nations. So strong reservationists just wanted some changes to the treaty. Irreconcilables didn't want to sign it at all. The irreconcilables and strong reservationists attacked the treaty and the League of Nations. President Wilson supported America's membership in the League of Nations and refused to compromise with the Senate. Wilson toured the United States to gain public support for the treaty, but he had a stroke during the tour. And the United States began the 20th century as an imperial power and reluctantly entered World War I to protect free trade. Involvement in the war led to changes for women and African Americans and an economic boom. And the United States played a major role in the peace process, but refusal to join the League weakened the ability of world leaders to stop World War II. All right, and we're going to stop here.